Okay, so that gives us, I think, a really good insider's perspective on why there would be a lot of reticence from the intelligence community and the Department of Defense, certain components in there, to participate even in a congressionally driven disclosure effort, even if there's a law passed. At the same time, though, let's think about the motives they might have to participate. Because look, I've been told by people, look, there were plans and they didn't go so well. You can see traces of them out in the public. Now, I don't know that that's true. I mean, I really don't know that that's true, but I've been told that. I believe the sources. So and I've certainly been told that there were efforts at the presidential level to at least consider this and to consider a course of action where there was a thought that, okay, there might be reasons, be they political or ethical, to let people know that this is real. So, what do you think the perspective would be in some of the government components that are working on this? From my perspective, presumably the CIA, presumably also the NSA to some extent,
Yeah.
presumably some high-level DoD components and the Air
Right.
Force and so on. I mean, the usual suspects. I mean, what might the motive for them be to participate in disclosure?
Well, you have this big matzo ball that's hanging out there, right? And what is that? And that's basically millions of people around the world have experienced some form of UAP or its attendant phenomena, right? It's out there. It's hanging out there. I mean, it's the evidence is overwhelming. And when we talk about disclosure, I mean, disclosure to a certain extent has already happened, right? Well, when we're really talking about disclosure, what we're really talking about is the government. What is the government saying? And what does the government know that, and why, and why are they hiding it? And we want to know this, and we have a right to know this, an ethical right and a moral right, an historical right to know this, right? So you're sitting there, and this is really extraordinarily bothersome to me on a personal level, because part of me wants to know. I want the government to come out and tell me, what do you know about this? But I think the government finds itself in a position, and it's not that difficult to understand their position. What if they don't know anything? What if they basically come out? I mean, I know in the amendment, Schumer amendment, they talked about, and Carl Nell had a beautiful piece at Soul he did on this, talking about limited disclosure and catastrophic disclosure, and why you really want to look at limited disclosure is probably the best way to go about doing that. What no one's has explained to me yet is, how do you do limited disclosure, and what would happen even with limited disclosure? I always go back to that comment in T.S. Eliot's was the Four Quartets, and he said, "Humankind cannot bear too much reality." And I know it's easy for me to say, but how sure are we, if the president came out tomorrow, that the narrative would be controlled, and that and not just as president, any president, if the narrative would be controlled to the point where people aren't going to panic, and there isn't going to be aren't going to be sociological problems or psychosocial problems, and we're not scaring 8-year-old kids, right? That these because the narratives will be filled. If we don't fill the narrative will be filled, and they will be filled by every UFO researcher that's out there, every crank that's out there, every scientist that's out there, and there'll be this battle for information. We're seeing this already. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing this total disinformation out there. So it's problematic. I lean towards disclosure. I want disclosure. I just want disclosure in a way that's not going to, it's going to be disruptive. No question about it.
Yeah.
But the degree of disruption is what I think we have to be concerned about. And I think that's what the people in the legacy program are probably dealing with right now. How do you actually say this out loud? And then how do you control that information? You don't want to let it all out for fear that, tell your friend, tell your enemies. But you want to let enough of it out that you validate people's experiences with this phenomenon.
Well, you also want to let it out I mean, you also want to let it out in a graded fashion or a gradual fashion, because what you don't want to have happen is something you precisely identified a second ago, which is the second there's a acknowledgement, an official acknowledgement from a president or the executive branch, then all the questions begin. And it's impossible to take all the questions and answer all the questions because you have a classification problem. You also may know things that in fact would be frightening, that could be traumatizing or simply disturbing to the private sector or to certain religions. I mean, maybe very local kind of damage that gets done socially by certain pieces of information. Now, Carl Nell's proposal for the Disclosure Act is, in fact, you want to make sure you have a dedicated panel of people to review information and prep those decisions, because a Secretary of State or some commensurate cabinet level cabinet official isn't going to have the time to do this. You can't suddenly assign someone in an administration to do this. You basically need a plan. So that's the upside to something like the Disclosure Act. I think the downside to it is there is a knowledge and an understanding problem. You pointed out we don't know we really have no idea what's known and what's not known. My perspective often is the ceiling of understanding is going to be pretty low on what you do know, because those of us who are out here in academia working on it tend to think we don't understand much of it at all. So having said all that, if you had to speculate, or if you had to make some inferences based on how federal government works, how intelligence works, what do you think might be known?
I formed my opinion on, and people think I've been accused of being too cautious or overly cautious. That is something I learned in the intelligence business, because when you engage in an operation and you're conducting an operation, and where sometimes people's lives are at stake, or it's maybe not people's lives are at stake, but there can be a considerable amount of embarrassment or what have you. I mean, you try to cover all the bases, and you look for points of failure. You look for places where this operation might fail. I mean, a good example was when they conducted against Osama bin Laden, and I think the intelligence community basically told Obama, it's 80%, 80% chance of success. Now, an 80% chance of success in the intelligence business on these things, you sometimes will take that, particularly if it's really important, and you'll deal with the 20% if it goes south. But if you, what I've heard, what I've been told in a classified setting by people who are, them. I'm not going to name them, but them. And there's one I won't say any of their names because I don't have permission to do that. But they're all, very well schooled in this and have been involved in UAP and the phenomenon itself, which is a whole another kettle of fish. And when you start talking to them and you get into the details of what you always thought might be true. I've been studying this for 40 plus years, right? And to me, there was always a veil there, right? Well, this is what I've been reading. Wow, that's fascinating, and then somebody comes up and tells you, well, actually it's true. And they start showing you things and telling you things. Then you get more and more cautious. And then you realize that, well, okay, it's not quite what people think it is. And then when they try to explain to you what they think it is, because they don't really know either. I've never met anybody who actually knows, by the way. And it's almost all conjecture, that you get from researchers and people in the know, is that, well, we think it's this. And it always comes back to two things, quantum mechanics and consciousness, but consciousness in particular. When Max Planck back in 1931 said, hey, I think, matter is derivative from consciousness. I mean, that was I remember first reading that in college, and I didn't quite grasp what the hell he meant by that. But over the years, I have. It's just astounding. I mean, it's a fundamental change in the way you look at everything and the way you view reality. So if someone tells you, when these people were telling me these things, I mean, I had a very difficult time with it, and for a considerable amount of time, still do, with dealing with aspects of our reality, our consensus reality, what we know to be true or we think to be true, and was actually beyond our senses. And that's actually also probably true. And I think we have to be very, very careful, at least cognizant of that. And then how do you, if you know that, and how do you then, how do you explain that in a lexicon that we all understand? I was reading your paper on, the corporeal, UAP being corporeal. I loved it. Absolutely brilliant, actually. And, but you spoke a lot about, how we see reality, and, and how we're supposed to adjust to it. And, is how it presents itself, how UAP presents itself. We have to take it at face value. Sometimes we just can't say it's all an illusion. We don't know. There's a physicality to a lot of this too. People have markings on their body. We see markings on the ground. We have sensor data, everything along those lines. So, and yet we don't have the explanation for it. So I guess I'm being a little discursive. I apologize, but my first and primary goal is when I deal with thinking about disclosure is I just keep thinking about 8-year-olds and 12-year-olds. How are they going to deal with this? How are they going to say to their parents? I mean, when 9/11 happened, or JFK, you were too young for JFK's assassination. I remember that very, very clearly. And all these really terrible things, Pearl Harbor, right, shook the American population to its core. But yet, what did we have? I mean, we had somebody to go back to. We had a president. We had a Defense Department. We had the intelligence community to say, it's okay. Eventually we're going to have this under control, so don't worry too much. But in this particular case, if you tell people we're being visited by entities, and we know this to be true, it is true. It's a fact. I'll just state that it's a fact. There are downcraft, NHI are real, and we don't know what they are. Those are the three principal things everybody should realize. And frankly, you don't even need the government telling you that. If you just read the material that's out there now, you would come to that same conclusion. It's really hard to not come to that conclusion if you read the material. But again, let's go back. What does this actually mean? We don't have a way to explain any of this. There's no social anthropologist out there, no physicist out there. There's no religious scholar out there, no social psychologist that's out there, or clinical psychologist that is going to be able to sit down with the American public and say, don't panic. It's okay. Oh, yeah, you still have free will. Well, maybe you don't have free will.
Okay, so let's.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, this is where I'm going with this. Yeah, and I don't want to get too crazy woo here, but nevertheless, these are the kind of questions that are going to be discussed if you have limited disclosure. It's going to come out whether you like it or not. Yeah.